The year is 2025, a time of significant political and economic shifts. Donald Trump, having secured a second term as President of the United States, returned to the White House with renewed vigor and a clear agenda. He made good on his campaign promise to prioritize American interests, even if it meant shaking up long-standing alliances and disrupting the global economic order. The first casualty of this new era of economic nationalism was Canada, America's closest neighbor and trading partner. Trump, citing unfair trade practices and a growing trade deficit, slapped hefty tariffs on a wide range of Canadian goods, from automobiles to lumber, aiming to protect American industries. The move sent shockwaves through the global economy, but nowhere felt the tremors more acutely than the Canadian province of British Columbia and its southern neighbor, the American state of Alaska, both heavily reliant on cross-border trade. These tariffs were not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were a direct hit on the livelihoods of Canadians, affecting families and communities. The Canadian dollar tumbled, making imports more expensive and squeezing household budgets, leading to a rise in the cost of living. Industries reliant on exports to the U.S. were forced to lay off workers, sending ripples of economic anxiety and uncertainty across the nation. The sudden shift in trade policy left many Canadians feeling betrayed by their closest ally and wondering how their government would respond to this economic aggression. The Trump administration argued that these tariffs were necessary to protect American jobs and industries from what they saw as unfair competition. They pointed to the trade deficit with Canada as evidence that the playing field was tilted against American businesses, justifying their aggressive stance. The administration also accused Canada of unfairly subsidizing its industries, giving them an artificial advantage in the global market, further fueling the trade tensions. These arguments, however, did little to appease the concerns of those caught in the crossfire, both in Canada and the United States. The Canadian government, led by Prime Minister Jagmeet Singh, denounced the tariffs as unjustified and harmful to both countries' economies, calling for immediate negotiations. They vowed to retaliate with counter-tariffs on American goods, setting the stage for a protracted and potentially damaging trade war between the two North American neighbors. While the initial impact of the tariffs was felt most keenly in the manufacturing and agricultural sectors, it soon became clear that this trade dispute would have far-reaching consequences, impacting everything from energy prices to national security, and altering the economic landscape for years to come. British Columbia, sharing a vast, largely unpopulated border with Alaska, responded with a measure that would have seemed unthinkable just months prior: hefty tolls on American commercial vehicles using the Alaska Highway. This decision was not made lightly, but it was seen as a necessary step to protect local interests. This vital artery, connecting Alaska to the lower 48 states through Canadian territory, was now a choke point. The highway, once a symbol of cooperation and mutual benefit, had become a battleground for economic leverage. The move was both symbolic and strategic, a clear message to Washington that British Columbia would not be bullied and was prepared to leverage its geographical advantage. It was a bold statement of sovereignty and economic self-defense. The tolls, ranging from several hundred to over $1,000 per truck depending on size and cargo, sent shockwaves through Alaska's already vulnerable supply chain. The financial burden on trucking companies was immense, and the ripple effects were felt almost immediately. Alaska, heavily reliant on goods trucked in from the south, now faced skyrocketing transportation costs. The increased expenses were passed down to consumers, exacerbating the already high cost of living in the state. Supermarkets began rationing essential items, construction projects stalled due to material shortages, and fuel prices soared, hitting Alaskan communities already grappling with high living costs. The economic strain was palpable, and the sense of uncertainty grew. The Canadian government defended the tolls as a necessary response to the unfair trade practices of the United States. They emphasized that the tolls were a form of economic justice, ensuring that Canadian resources were not exploited without fair compensation. They argued that the tolls were simply a way to level the playing field and ensure that American companies were paying their fair share. The narrative was one of fairness and reciprocity. Publicly, the message was one of shared sacrifice and standing up for Canadian interests. The government sought to rally national pride and solidarity in the face of external pressures. Behind closed doors, however, there was a growing sense of unease. The potential for economic fallout and the risk of escalating trade tensions weighed heavily on policymakers. The tolls, while popular domestically, were a gamble. The long-term consequences were uncertain, and the stakes were high. British Columbia was keenly aware that the move could further escalate tensions with the U.S. and potentially lead to even more damaging retaliatory measures. The situation was a delicate balancing act. However, the province, backed by the federal government in Ottawa, felt it had no choice but to respond forcefully to the Trump administration's aggressive trade policies. The decision was a testament to Canada's resolve to protect its economic interests and assert its sovereignty on the global stage. The immediate impact on Alaska was swift and severe. The cost of living, already significantly higher than the national average, soared as businesses passed on the increased transportation costs to consumers. Supermarket shelves, once stocked with produce from California and manufactured goods from across the U.S., began to thin. Construction projects ground to a halt as materials failed to arrive. The state's tourism industry, a vital engine of the Alaskan economy, also took a hit as potential visitors, faced with the prospect of navigating border checkpoints and paying exorbitant tolls, opted for alternative destinations. The Alaskan way of life, so reliant on the seamless flow of goods and people across the border, was being tested like never before. The situation was particularly dire in rural communities, many of which were already struggling with limited access to essential services and high unemployment rates. The trade war, with its attendant supply chain disruptions and price hikes, threatened to push these communities to the brink. The Alaskan government, caught in the crossfire of a geopolitical dispute, was left scrambling for solutions. The crisis laid bare Alaska's unique vulnerability. Its geographic isolation, once romanticized as a mark of its rugged independence, was now a liability. The state's reliance on the Alaska Highway, a lifeline connecting it to the rest of the U.S., made it acutely susceptible to pressure from its southern neighbor. The trade war, in its early days, had already exposed the fragility of Alaska's supply chain and the high cost of its dependence. The trade war's impact, however, extended far beyond balance sheets and supermarket shelves, affecting various sectors of the economy and society. It quickly escalated into a national security concern for the United States, raising alarms at the highest levels of government. The Arctic, experiencing rapid ice melt due to climate change, was becoming a new frontier for resource extraction and geopolitical competition, attracting global attention. Russia and China were increasingly assertive in the region, eager to capitalize on the opening Arctic and its untapped potential, positioning themselves as dominant players. Alaska, with its strategic location and vast coastline, was on the front lines of this new Cold War, serving as a critical point of interest for both defense and resource management. The Pentagon, tasked with safeguarding American interests in the Arctic, watched with growing concern as the trade dispute threatened to undermine Alaska's stability and weaken its ability to serve as a strategic bulwark, essential for national security. The escalating tensions between the U.S. and Canada, two of the Arctic Council's most powerful members, threatened to undermine cooperation and stability in the region, complicating diplomatic efforts. Russia, eager to exploit any divisions within NATO, watched the unfolding drama with keen interest, sensing an opportunity to advance its own agenda in the Arctic, potentially altering the balance of power. The trade war, initially dismissed by some as a mere economic squabble, was quickly evolving into a geopolitical chess match with potentially global ramifications, affecting international relations. The Pentagon, caught between its mandate to protect American interests and the need to maintain strong alliances, faced a dilemma, balancing strategic priorities. On the one hand, it could not ignore the strategic implications of a weakened and isolated Alaska, which could compromise national security. On the other hand, any direct intervention in the trade dispute risked further antagonizing Canada, a vital ally in a region of growing geopolitical importance, making diplomatic navigation crucial.